I used to believe I was fearless. Horror movies, I devoured them. The more terrifying, the better. I'd watch them alone, late at night, the house wrapped in silence and shadow. No matter how chilling the scenes, I always told myself it was just pretend, just a story. Real life, I thought, wasn't like that. But then that night happened. It was late September, and the air had suddenly turned crisp, almost cold. A storm was brewing, the kind that appears from nowhere as summer fades into autumn. I was completely alone, savoring the peace after a long day. My roommate Sam was away for the weekend, and I intended to enjoy the solitude. A gentle rain had just begun, tapping softly against the windows, a sound that slowly deepened into a more demanding drumming. I was settled on the living room couch, laptop balanced, halfway through a video game that had consumed my focus for days. It was a story-rich game, pulling me deep into its strange worlds and complex characters. I was utterly absorbed, the real world disappearing as I explored its eerie, ghost-filled settings. A sudden flash of lightning ripped me out of my trance. The room blazed with light for an instant, then plunged back into even deeper gloom. I looked up, startled, only then realizing how profoundly dark it had become outside. The storm had rushed in, swift and fierce. The wind howled, shaking the windows. A deep growl of thunder echoed overhead, vibrating through the very structure of the house. I paused the game, needing to move. The room now felt too still, the storm's presence creeping into my thoughts. I stood and walked to the window, peering out at the street. Rain poured down in torrents, turning the wet pavement into a mirror that twisted the streetlight's glow. The houses opposite were black, their windows empty and dead, everyone else hidden from the storm. I was about to turn away when my gaze snagged. He was there, standing on the sidewalk directly across from my home. At first I blinked, wondering if my eyes were deceiving, but then another burst of lightning illuminated the entire scene, and I saw him plainly, a man in a gray hooded top, perfectly still, his gaze fixed on my house. My first thought was that he might be waiting for someone, perhaps a neighbor, but his unnerving stillness, standing so calmly amidst the storm, immediately set off a warning inside me. I watched him for another moment, hoping he'd shift, offer some sign he was just a normal person caught in the downpour. He didn't. He simply stood staring. A deep chill ran through me, and I quickly drew the curtains closed. "It's probably nothing," I whispered to myself. "Just some guy caught by the weather." But I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling, the sense that his presence meant something more than just unlucky time. I tried to dive back into the game, but my focus was shattered. My eyes kept darting to the window, half expecting to see him there, peering inside. After a few minutes I gave up and shut the game down. The house suddenly felt too vast, too deserted, the silence suffocating. I wandered into the kitchen, thinking a cup of tea might soothe my racing nerves. The rain was still pouring relentlessly, its drumming sound filling the kitchen. I was reaching for the kettle when the doorbell ripped through the quiet like a blade, making me leap. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in such a fierce storm. Who could it be? The bell chimed again, this time more demanding. Slowly, my mind racing, I crept towards the front door. It could be a delivery, or maybe a neighbor needing help, I tried to tell myself. But as I reached the door and looked through the tiny peephole, my breath hitched. It was him. The man in the hooded top stood on my porch. His face was lost in the deep shadow of his hood, yet I could feel his eyes on me, could sense the fierce intensity of his stare, even through the solid wood. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What was he doing here? How did he move from the street to my porch so fast, so silent? My mind spun with questions, none of them offering any comfort. He didn't stir, he just stood there, waiting. I didn't open the door. A primal instinct screamed at me that it would be a terrible mistake. Instead, I backed away, moving as silently as possible, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I crept into the living room, leaving the lights off, hoping he wouldn't spot me through the windows. My own breathing sounded harsh and broken, almost as loud as the storm. For an age I just stood, listening, waiting. But the doorbell stayed silent. Slowly I started to calm myself, trying to believe he had left, that it was just a strange joke, or a simple mistake. But then I heard it, faint, soft steps, but unmistakable, moving around the side of the house. My blood froze. He was still here, still seeking a way inside. I moved with extreme care, battling to stay calm, forcing myself to think. All the doors were locked, but windows surrounded the house. The thought of him finding a way in, slipping through the shadows while I stood trapped, was unbearable. I snatched my phone and called Sam. No answer, of course. He was likely out with friends. His phone switched off. I swore under my breath, my mind churning, looking for options. I could call the police, but what would I tell them? Some guy is standing outside my house. They wouldn't take it seriously, unless he actually attempted to break in. The footsteps stopped. For a terrifying moment, an eerie silence settled. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement, any sound. Nothing. Just the relentless rain beating against the windows. Then, without warning, a loud, sharp bang sliced through the stillness, making me jump. It came from the back door, the one that opened onto the small patio and garden. I whirled and ran towards it, my heart thundering in my ears. I reached the kitchen just as I caught a quick glimpse through the glass. The dark shape of the man in the hoodie, pressing against the door. His face was hidden, but I saw his hands, pale and spectral, as they pushed on the glass, testing the handle. Panic exploded inside me. Without a thought, I snatched the closest thing, a kitchen knife, its blade sharp and cold in my shaking hand. I held it out, as if it could somehow shield me from the terror on the other side. The door shook as he tried to force it, but thankfully it held firm. I watched, frozen with terror, as he kept pressing against the glass, his breath clouding the wind. He was so close now that I could see his eyes, cold, dark, and completely empty of any human feeling. For a moment I was paralyzed, caught between the urge to flee and the need to stand my ground. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he stepped back, fading into the deep shadow. I could barely breathe, waiting for him to try another door, another window. But he didn't. He was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the knife, my body shaking with adrenaline and fear. The storm howled outside, but the house was eerily silent, every creak magnified by the dread that filled the air. Finally, I forced myself to move, making my way to the front door. I paused, then slowly opened it, peering out into the downpour. The porch was empty, the street beyond, dark and deserted. But as I closed the door, I saw it, a small slip of paper taped to the glass, right at eye level. My hands trembled as I reached for it, peeling it off with a profound sense of dread that coiled in my stomach. The note was stark, written in neat, careful letters. "Have you forgotten?" Those words clung to me for days. I couldn't stop thinking about them, replaying the entire night again and again. The man in the hoodie, his silent, deliberate movements, and that chilling question, what did it mean? I tried to return to my normal routine, but I was deeply shaken. I'd never faced anything like it, and the fear had dug itself deep into my very being, gnawing at me whenever I was by myself. I constantly found myself glancing over my shoulder, flinching at every little sound, every creak of the floorboards. Sam noticed something was wrong the moment he returned. "Dude, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, dropping his bag and giving me a worried look. I forced a weak laugh, trying to dismiss it. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well. The storm was pretty wild," he nodded, accepting my excuse without question. But as the days passed, he began to sense my unease. I'd catch him observing me, his brow lined with concern, but he never put. That was something I truly valued about Sam. He knew when to let me be. Then late one night, probably near midnight, I got a call. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, utterly unable to sleep. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, and I grabbed it, hoping it was Sam. who was out late again. But it wasn't Sam. The caller ID was blocked. Just a jumble of numbers that made no sense. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something pushed me to answer. Hello? Silence. I heard nothing but my own shaky breathing, the frantic beat of my heart in my ears. Hello? I tried again, my voice barely a tremor. Then I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper, almost lost in the static. Have you forgotten? The call ended. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might tear through my chest. I didn't know the voice, but the words were identical. The same terrifying question from the note. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw his face, that pale, blank stare emerging from the shadows. I tried to convince myself it was just a chance event, a cruel prank, but a chilling certainty told me otherwise. He wasn't finished. And then I heard it, footsteps, soft yet distinct, moving through the house. My blood ran cold. I recognized those steps. I'd heard them before. I shot up, my heart racing, every instinct screaming at me to run. But there was nowhere to hide, no place he couldn't reach. I seized the kitchen knife once more, my hands shaking as I gripped it. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they paused right outside the living room door. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed with raw fear. The silence was absolute, the weight agonizing. Then the door slowly, agonizingly, creaked open, and he was there. The man in the hoodie stood framed in the doorway, his face still hidden, but I could see his eyes, cold, dark, filled with something that sent a tremor through me. He didn't speak, he just stood, watching me, his presence filling the room with a crushing weight of dread. I tightened my hold on the knife, my mind screaming. I had to act, had to defend myself. But before I could move, he took a step forward, and I froze. Why are you doing that? I finally managed to whisper, my voice trembling. He tilted his head slightly, as if pondering my question. Then he took another step. Have you forgotten? He whispered, his voice low and grating, like dry leaves scraping across pavement. The words jolted me with sheer terror, and I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall with a thud. I wanted to scream, to cry for help, but my throat was constricted, the sounds trapped. He took another step, and now I could see his face, pale and hollow, his eyes sunken deep into their socket. There was something familiar about him, something that scratched at the edges of my memory, but I couldn't quite grasp it. Please, just leave me alone, I pleaded, my voice barely audible. But he didn't stop. He kept advancing, his steps soft and measured, until he stood directly before me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of a cold touch, I heard the door slam shut. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. The room was empty, the door closed, as if he'd never been there at all. I slumped to the floor, the knife falling from my numb fingers, gasping for air. My entire body trembled, my mind spinning, as I tried to grasp what had just occurred. But there were no answers, no rational explanation. All I knew was the man in the hoodie had vanished, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was alone, or so I thought. As I sat there, trying to slow my frantic heart, I noticed something on the floor, just a few feet away. It was another note, penned in the same neat, careful handwriting as before. This one conveyed a different message. You will remember, I never saw him again. But that final note proved chillingly true. It's been years since that night, and I recall every detail as if it were yesterday. I've always found something strangely comforting about thunderstorms. There's a certain rhythm to them, the steady fall of rain, the distant rumble of thunder, the way the world seems to pause, enveloped in nature's fury. My 6-year-old son, Arthur, shares this fascination. It's become our special tradition to sit together under the gazebo in our backyard, watching the storms roll in. That August night began like any other. A late summer tempest had been predicted all week, meant to finally break the sweltering heat wave. The moment the first raindrops started tapping against the windows, Arthur tugged at my sleeve, his eyes wide with excitement. Dad, can we go outside, please? I couldn't resist his eagerness. Sure, buddy, let's grab some snacks and head out. As we stepped outside, the world was already transforming. Dark clouds swallowed the last slivers of daylight, turning the sky into a turbulent, gray ocean. The air hung thick and heavy with that unique stillness that precedes a powerful storm. We made our way to the gazebo, an old wooden structure nestled by the tree line at the back of our yard. It was our private sanctuary, a place where we could watch the chaos unfold while staying safely dry. We settled in, Arthur happily crunching on chips, as I leaned back, listening to the soft rustle of leaves in the growing wind. The first flashes of lightning streaked across the sky, momentarily illuminating the trees at the yard's edge in stark white. Arthur's eyes were glued to the scene, the storm's glow reflecting in their wide depths. "Wow, did you see that one, Dad?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Sure did," I smiled back. "It's going to be a big one tonight." The storm intensified. The rain picked up, becoming a steady roar on the gazebo's roof. Thunder cracked directly overhead, close enough to make us both jump a little, followed by Arthur's delighted giggle. There was something raw and powerful about being out there, yet secure from its... But as the storm raged on, a subtle unease began to prickle at my senses, like cold fingers brushing my neck. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows cast by the lightning lengthened, deepened. I tried to dismiss the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination. Then Arthur spoke up. "Dad, look over there," he said, pointing towards the tree line at the far end of the yard. I followed his gaze, squinting through the sheets of rain. For a moment I saw nothing but the dark shapes of the trees swaying violently. But then as the next lightning flash lit up the yard, I saw it, a figure standing right at the edge of the woods, almost blending into the darkness. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. They were too far for details, but something about their utterly still, silent stance sent a shiver down my spine. "Probably just someone from the neighborhood," I muttered, but the words felt hollow even to my own ear. Why would anyone be out there in the middle of a storm, just standing in our backyard? Arthur was watching me, waiting for reassurance. I forced a smile and patted his shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. Probably just someone passing by. Stay here, I'll go check it out." I grabbed the flashlight from a shelf by the door and stepped out into the storm, the rain instantly soaking through my clothes. I made my way across the yard, the flashlight's beam cutting through the downpour. The figure was still there, motionless at the edge of the woods. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you all right?" No response. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. A knot tightened in my stomach. I was closer now, close enough to see that whoever it was, wore something dark, perhaps a hooded top, pulled tight over their head. "Listen, if you're lost, I can help you." I tried again. Still no reaction. I took a few more steps, but as I did, the figure turned and vanished into the trees. It moved so swiftly and silently that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. The woods swallowed them, the darkness closing in. I stood there for a moment, staring into the woods, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to follow, to confirm there really was someone out there, but my rational mind told me it was a terrible idea. I was drenched, and stumbling through the dark, storm-swept woods seemed foolish. I turned back towards the house, forcing myself to walk calmly, not wanting Arthur to see how unnerved I was. As I reached the gazebo, I found him sitting exactly where I'd left him, his face pale. "Did you see him, Dad?" he asked, his voice small and frightened. "I saw someone, but they're gone now," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Probably just someone from the neighborhood. They must have gotten lost in the storm." Arthur nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Neither was I, to be honest, but I didn't want to scare him further. "Let's head inside, okay? This storm's getting worse." Arthur didn't argue. We gathered our things and hurried back to the house, the wind howling around. As we stepped inside, I locked the door, feeling an odd sense of relief at being back in the warm, brightly lit house. The storm continued to rage outside, the windows rattling in their frames, but at least we were safe, or so I thought. That night, the storm reached its peak. The rain poured in torrents, the wind howled like a living creature, shaking the house to its foundations. The power flickered a few times, plunging us into sudden darkness before the lights hummed back on. Arthur had gone to bed, but I could tell he was still uneasy about what we'd witnessed. After checking on him, I made my way to my own bedroom. I tried to shake off the lingering sense of unease, telling myself it was just the storm affecting me. But as I lay in bed,
listening to the wind and rain. Sleep refused to come easily. It was sometime in the middle of the night when I heard Arthur's voice calling out for me. "Dad, Dad, come here." I was out of bed in an instant, my heart racing. I hurried down the hallway to his room, finding him sitting up, his eyes wide with fear. "What is it, Arthur? What's wrong?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "He's outside, Dad," Arthur whispered, pointing towards the window. "The man from the woods." My blood ran cold. I turned slowly to look out the window, my breath catching in my throat. At first I saw nothing but the rain-streaked glass, the trees thrashing beyond. But then, as the lightning flashed, I saw him, a figure standing just outside the window, so close I could almost make out his features. He was taller than I'd thought, with broad shoulders hunched against the storm. The hood was still up, hiding his face in shadow, but I could see his eyes, cold, dark eyes that seemed to bore into me. A surge of protectiveness and fear washed over me. This wasn't just some lost stranger. Whoever this was, they had come back, and now they were right outside my son's window. "Stay here," I told Arthur, my voice shaking slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm going to take care of this." I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the closet and headed outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house felt different now, the walls closing in around me as I made my way to the back door. I threw it open and stepped out into the storm once more, the bat clenched tightly in my hands. The rain was coming down even harder now, each drop like a tiny hammer on my skin. I moved quickly, scanning the yard for any sign of the figure. For a moment, I thought he was gone, but then I saw him, standing by the corner of the house, half hidden in the shadows. He was watching me. "Hey," I shouted, raising the bat. "Get the hell out of here. Leave us alone." The figure didn't move. He just stood there, watching me with those dark, unblinking eyes. My pulse was racing, a mix of fear and anger churning in my gut. I took a step forward, ready to chase him off if I had to. But before I could move, he was gone. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. I blinked, disoriented, my mind struggling to catch up. I stood there, drenched and shaking, staring at the empty spot where he had been. Part of me wanted to run after him, to make sure he was truly gone, but the more rational part of me knew better. This wasn't something I could handle on my own. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the yard for any sign of movement. When I reached the door, I turned and bolted inside, locking it behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the door, the bat slipping from my hand. I went back to check on Arthur. He was still in bed, clutching his blanket, his eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, buddy," I said, trying to sound calm. "He's gone. We're safe now." But as I sat there holding my son, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The storm still raged outside, the wind howling through the trees, and somewhere out there in the darkness, I knew he was still watching. The storm finally passed in the early hours of the morning, leaving behind a world drenched and battered by the night's fury. I didn't sleep after that second encounter, instead staying by Arthur's side, listening for any sign of the intruder returning. But the house remained eerily silent, save for the steady drip of rainwater from the east. When dawn broke, I went outside again, this time armed with a sense of determination rather than fear. I needed to know if there was any trace of the man who had stalked our yard through the storm. The yard was a mess, the grass slick with mud and debris scattered everywhere. I walked the perimeter, checking the tree line. In the corner of the house where I had last seen him, there were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. It was as if the storm had washed away all evidence of his presence. But I knew what I had seen, what Arthur had seen. It wasn't just our imaginations playing tricks on us. I called the police, explaining what had happened. They came by later that morning, taking my statement and walking the property with me. But like me, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no clues as to who the figure might have been, or what he wanted. It's possible it was just someone trying to find shelter from the storm, one of the officers suggested, though his tone didn't convey much conviction. "Maybe," I replied, but I didn't believe it. There was something about the way the man had appeared, the way he had watched us, that didn't fit with the idea of a lost traveler. After the police left, I spent the rest of the day feeling on edge. My nerves frayed from the lack of sleep and the lingering fear that he might return. Arthur was quiet too, staying close to me as we went about our day. I tried to keep things normal, but the unease hung over us like a shadow. That night, after Arthur was asleep, I went back outside one last time. The air was cool and still, the storm's fury replaced by an almost eerie calm. I walked the yard again, flashlight in hand, checking every corner, every shadow, but once again, there was nothing. I stood at the edge of the yard, looking out into the woods. The trees were dark and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still out there, watching. As I turned to go back inside, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped around, shining the flashlight into the trees, but I saw nothing, just the darkness stretching on and on. I stayed out there for a long time, staring into the woods, trying to convince myself it was over, that we were safe. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The storm had passed, but the fear it brought with it had left its mark, a lingering sense of dread that wouldn't easily fade. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but think of the man standing out there in the storm, watching us. Whoever he was, wherever he had come from, I knew he was still out there, and I had a feeling he wasn't done with us yet. Moving into a new place always brings a mix of excitement and worry. There's the thrill of a fresh start, of making a space your own, but also the stress of unpacking, settling in, and adjusting to unfamiliar sights and sounds. For me, this move was meant to be a new beginning. I was eager to leave the city behind, to trade its noise and chaos for peace and quiet. The house itself was charming in its own way, with tall windows and a big yard. It had been empty for a while, the previous owners having moved out suddenly, but that didn't bother me. The rent was low, and the neighborhood was calm, exactly what I needed. The first few days were a flurry of unpacking and getting settled. I spent most of my time arranging furniture, hanging pictures, and trying to make the place feel like home. The house was drafty, with a chill that seemed to sink into your bones, but I figured it would warm up once the heater got going. The only part of the house I truly disliked was the basement. It was a typical old house basement, dark, damp, and smelling of dust and mildew, with low ceilings and crumbling concrete walls. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, and the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered ominously whenever it was turned on. I had only gone down there once to quickly check the space, and had no plans to return, unless absolutely necessary. It gave me the creeps, but I tried not to dwell on it. After all, basements are supposed to be creepy.
That night, as I sat in the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, the first storm rolled in. It was one of those sudden summer storms, the sky darkening in an instant, the wind picking up and then the rain pouring down in sheets. I watched from the window as lightning lit up the sky. I had always loved storms, their raw power and energy. They felt like nature's way of reminding us how small we truly are. But there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the new house, the strange surroundings, or perhaps just my frayed nerve. But as the storm raged on, a deep sense of unease began to settle over me. It started with a sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to echo through the entire house. At first I thought it was just the wind, or something outside being battered by the storm. But as I listened closely, I realized it was coming from inside. I stood up, my heart beginning to race, trying to pinpoint where the sound originated. It was coming from below, from the basement. I hesitated, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I didn't want to go down there, didn't want to face whatever might be causing that noise. But I couldn't just ignore it. The rational part of my brain told me it was probably just a loose pipe, or maybe the old furnace acting up. I needed to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way to the basement door. It creaked open, revealing the steep stairs, disappearing into darkness. The thumping noise was louder now, echoing up from below like the steady beat of a drum. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and started down the stairs, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air grew colder with each step, the musty smell of the basement swirling around me like a shroud. The noise grew louder, more insistent, as if something was waiting for me. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I shone the flashlight around the room, trying to locate the source of the sound. The basement was just as I remembered it, dark, damp, and cluttered with old, forgotten junk left behind by previous tenants. The walls were stained with age, the concrete floor uneven and cracked, and there at the far end of the room was a door I hadn't noticed before. It was small, barely more than a crawl space, and it was secured with a heavy rusted padlock. The thumping was coming from behind that door, a steady, relentless rhythm that sent chills down my spine. I stood there, frozen, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. But a part of me couldn't bear not knowing what was causing the noise, and that urge pushed me forward. I took a step closer to the door, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. The thumping continued, a slow, deliberate beat, like a heart pounding against the wall. I reached out, my hand shaking, as I touched the cold metal of the padlock. It was old, rusted, but solid, the kind of lock that hadn't been opened in years. And then suddenly, the thumping stopped. I froze. The silence pressed in around me like a heavy weight. The only sound was the rain pounding outside, the wind howling through the trees. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I couldn't stay down there any longer. I turned and ran up the stairs, not stopping until I had slammed the basement door shut behind me. I stood there, my back against the door, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that there was nothing down there. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. The next day I couldn't stop thinking about the basement. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bright, clear morning, but the unease lingered. I tried to go about my day, focusing on unpacking and organizing, but the thought of that locked door, of whatever had been making that noise, gnawed at me. I knew I had to go back down there. I had to know what was behind that door. I waited until the afternoon, when the sun was high in the sky, and the house was bathed in warm, comforting light. It was easier to face the basement in the daylight, easier to convince myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. I grabbed the flashlight again, along with a crowbar I had found in the garage, and made my way back to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, the air growing colder with each step, but I forced myself to keep going. When I reached the bottom, the basement was just as dark and musty as before, but the thumping noise was gone. The silence was almost worse though, thick and oppressive. I made my way to the locked door, my heart pounding in my chest. The padlock was still there, old and rusted, but I was determined to get it open. I wedged the crowbar under the lock and began to pry, the metal groaning. It took longer than I expected, the old lock stubbornly refusing to give way. But finally, with a loud snap, it broke free. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway that led deeper into the basement. I hesitated, shining the flashlight into the darkness. The air was colder here, the musty smell more intense. The passageway was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, the walls closing in around me as I stepped inside. I moved slowly, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The passageway seemed to go on forever. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the fear building with each step. And then at the end of the passageway, I saw it, a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old, decaying wood. In the center of the room was a single chair, and sitting in that chair was a figure, slumped over and still. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was small, almost childlike, its head bowed, its hands resting limply in its lap. The clothes were old, tattered and covered in dust, as if they had been there for years. I stepped closer, my heart racing, the fear clawing at my chest. I could see the figure more clearly now, a young girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old. Her hair was matted and tangled, her skin pale and lifeless. I wanted to run, Wanted to get as far away from that room as possible, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the girl's face, on the hollow, empty eyes that stared back at me. And then to my horror, she moved. Her head lifted, her eyes meeting mine, and a slow, eerie smile spread across her face. Her lips parted, and in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, she spoke. "Why did you leave me?" I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The room was plunged into darkness, and I could feel the cold, clammy air closing in around me, the sound of her voice echoing in my ears. I turned and ran, blindly groping my way back through the passageway, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear her behind me, the soft sound of footsteps, the whisper of her voice growing louder, closer. "Why did you leave me?" I burst out of the passageway and raced up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside, the bright sunlight blinding me as I stumbled into the yard. I leaned against the side of the house, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? Was it real? Or was it some twisted figment of my imagination, brought on by the fear and the darkness of the basement? But deep down, I knew it was real. I knew that the girl in the basement was real, and that she was still down there. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the basement. Couldn't stop hearing her voice in my head, that haunted question that echoed in my mind. Why did you leave me? I couldn't stay in the house anymore. The fear was too much, the sense of dread too overwhelming. I started sleeping in my car, parked in the driveway, too afraid to go back inside. But even then, I couldn't escape her. The fear followed me, gnawing at my mind, driving me to the brink of madness. I knew I had to leave, had to get as far away from that house as possible. But there was something that kept pulling me back, something that wouldn't let me go. It was like the house itself had a hold on me, like the girl in the basement was calling out to me, begging me to stay. And then one night, as I sat in my car, trying to force myself to drive away, I heard it again, the thumping noise, faint but unmistakable, coming from the basement. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know what was going on, had to confront whatever was down there, once and for all. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way back into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement door creaked open, and I descended into the darkness. The air was colder than ever, the musty smell almost suffocating. The thumping noise grew louder as I reached the bottom, echoing through the room like the beating of a drum. I made my way to the passageway, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The door was still open, the darkness inside beckoning me forward. I stepped into the passageway, my breath catching in my throat as I made my way to the room at the end. The girl was still there, sitting in the chair, her eyes fixed on me. The eerie smile was gone, replaced by an expression of sadness, of longing. Her voice was soft, almost pleading as she spoke. "Why did you leave me?" I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The fear had taken hold, paralyzing me as I stood there staring at her. She slowly stood up. "Why did you leave me?" she repeated, her voice growing louder, more insistent. Why did you leave me?" I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from her. She took a step forward, then another, her hollow eyes locked on mine. And then, with a desperate effort, I turned and ran, the sound of her voice echoing in my ears, the darkness closing in around me. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air biting at my skin, the fear still gnawing at my mind. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to leave, had to get as far away from that house as possible. I grabbed what little I could carry and drove away, the fear still gripping me, the girl's voice still echoing in my mind. I never went back. I couldn't. The house was sold and I moved on, trying to put the past behind me. But no matter how far I ran, I could never escape the memory of the girl in the basement, the fear that still haunted me. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the darkness presses in, I can still hear her voice calling out to me. Why did you leave me? Driving at night had always been something I enjoyed. There's a peaceful stillness to it, the world quiet,
The road's empty except for an occasional passing car. It's like the darkness brings a calm that daylight never could. So when the storm started that evening, I didn't think much of it. I'd driven through worse. I was on my way home from my parents' place, a trip I made at least once a month. The route was familiar. Country roads winding through miles of open fields and dense wood. These roads felt secluded, even during the day. But at night, especially with a storm rolling in, they could feel downright desolate. The first raindrops splattered against my windshield. As I pulled onto the main road, the sky was a deep, bruised gray. I turned on the wipers, listening to their rhythmic thump as they swept the water away. The storm was picking up quickly, the rain coming down harder, the wind buffeting the car. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing louder with each passing minute. I drove on, my headlights cutting through the darkness ahead, the road barely visible in the downpour. I knew these roads well, every curve, every bump, but the storm had a way of making even the most familiar places feel strange, almost menacing. It was about halfway home when I saw him. The rain was coming down in sheets, so thick it was like driving through a waterfall. I was focused on the road, trying to keep my car from sliding on the slick pavement, when a flash of lightning lit up the sky. In that brief, blinding moment, I saw him, a man standing in the middle of the road, dressed entirely in white. My heart leaped into my throat, and I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as they fought for traction. The car swerved, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to lose control. But then miraculously, the tires caught, and the car skidded to a stop, just inches away from where the man had been standing. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, panic gasp. The rain was pounding on the roof, the sound deafening, but all I could think about was the man I had almost hit. I couldn't see him anymore. The darkness and the rain had swallowed him up. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of a storm, wearing all white, just standing in the road? The question echoed in my mind, but there was no answer, just the relentless pounding of the rain. Slowly I released my grip on the steering wheel and peered through the windshield, squinting into the darkness. The road ahead was empty. The man in white was nowhere to be seen. I should have felt relieved, but instead a chill ran down my spine, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones. Maybe he had moved off the road, I thought. Maybe he was just some poor soul who got caught in the storm and was trying to find shelter. But if that were true, why hadn't I seen him move? It was like he just vanished into thin air. I shook my head, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I couldn't just sit there all night. I needed to get home. With one last glance at the empty road, I put the car back in gear and slowly started driving again, my hands still trembling on the wheel. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The rain seemed louder now, the wind more insistent, like it was trying to tell me something. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man in white standing behind me, but the road was empty, just the way it should be. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right, and it was about to get a lot worse. I was almost home, just a few miles to go, when it happened. The storm was at its peak now, the wind howling like a living thing, the rain so heavy, it was like driving through a curtain of water. I had to slow down, the car barely crawling along, as I tried to see the road ahead. That's when I saw him again. It was just a flicker of movement at first, a pale shape darting across the road, barely visible through the rain. My heart skipped a beat, and I slammed on the brakes again, my mind racing. I had seen him, hadn't I? The man in white, running across the road. I peered through the windshield, my breath fogging up the glass. For a moment, everything was still, the only sound the relentless drumming of the rain. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, a flash of white, darting on the side of the road. Panic surged through me, and I yanked the wheel to the side, trying to avoid him. The tires skidded on the wet pavement, and the car spun out of control. I felt the world tilt, the headlights sweeping across the trees in a dizzying blur. And then with a sickening crunch, the car slammed into something solid. The impact knocked the breath out of me, the seatbelt cutting into my chest as I was thrown forward. For a moment, everything went dark, the world reduced to the sound of my own ragged breathing, and the rain hammering on the roof. When I opened my eyes, I was slumped over the steering wheel, my head pounding, my vision blurry. The car had come to a stop, half on the road, half in the ditch. The front end crumpled against a tree. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man in white. I had seen him, hadn't I? But now, in the cold aftermath of the crash, I wasn't so sure. Had I really seen someone, or had the storm and the darkness played tricks on me? Gingerly, I reached up and touched my forehead, wincing as my fingers brushed a tender spot. I was bleeding, just a small cut, but it added to the growing sense of panic that was building inside me. I needed to get out of the car, needed to see if the man was still out there. I fumbled with the seatbelt, my hands shaking, and finally managed to unclip it. The car door groaned as I pushed it open, the rain immediately soaking me to the skin. I stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me, and looked around. The road was empty, no sign of the man and no sign of anything, really. Just the trees looming on either side of the road, their branches swaying in the wind. I walked around the front of the car, the headlights casting long shadows across the wet ground. The front bumper was smashed, the hood crumpled from the impact, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. I'd been lucky. I realized that I hadn't been going faster. Still, the car was stuck half in the ditch, the tires spinning uselessly in the mud. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but of course there was no signal. Not out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm. I cursed under my breath, shoving the phone back into my pocket. I stood there, my mind reeling. Had I really seen him? Or was I losing my mind? The rain was still pouring down, the wind still howling, but I'd barely noticed. I was too shaken, too confused, to care about anything else. All I knew was that I had to get out of there. I had to get away from whatever it was I had just encountered. I stumbled back to the car, my hands trembling, as I fumbled for the door handle. I had to get out of here, had to get home. But as I reached for the door, I heard a sound, close, like something was moving through the trees, coming toward me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. But it wasn't the man in white. It was my father. I was so shaken that I hadn't even noticed his car coming. "Dad," I cried out, relief flooding through me. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes plastered to his body, but I didn't care. He was here. I wasn't alone anymore. "Are you okay?" he called back, hurrying over to me. "What happened?" "I saw your car." I cut him off, my words tumbling out in a rush. "There was a man. He was in the road. I crashed. He was here, Dad. He was right here." My father's brow furrowed as he looked around, his gaze sweeping over the trees, the road, the empty space where the man in white had been. "I don't see anyone," he said, his voice calm but cautious. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I insisted, my voice shaking. "He was right there, I swear." My father looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "Let's get you out of here. We'll figure this out later." He helped me into his truck, and we drove the rest of the way home in silence. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the truck, it felt like a different world, warm and dry. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the man in white, standing by the side of the road, but he was gone, just like before. It was like he had never been there. "Maybe it was a spirit," my father said quietly, after a long pause. "You hear stories out here in the country about things that walk the roads at night, especially during storms. Lost souls looking for something or someone." I shivered, the thought sending a chill down my spine. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think that what I had seen was something other than human. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. There was something otherworldly about the man in white, something that didn't belong in this world. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. When morning came, I got a call from the police. They had found my car, still stuck in the ditch where I had left it. They asked me to come down to the station, said they had some questions. When I arrived, the officer in charge showed me a picture. It was of the man in white, just as I had described him, pale, gaunt, dressed in old-fashioned clothes that looked like they belonged in another century. "Do you recognize this man?" the officer asked. I nodded, my throat dry. "That's him," I said. "That's the man I saw." The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then turned back to me. We've been getting reports about him for years, he said, his voice low. People see him on the road, usually during storms, but no one's ever been able to find him. Not alive anyway. What do you mean? I asked, a chill running down my spine. The officer hesitated, then handed me a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline sent a jolt of fear through me. Local man found dead in storm, dressed in white, missing for days. I stared at the clipping, my mind reeling. The date was from over 50 years ago. The man in the picture was the same one I had seen on the road, the same one who had caused me to crash, who had watched me with those cold, dark eyes. We don't know what he wants, the officer said quietly, but people say he's looking for something or someone. I left the station in a daze, the newspaper clipping clutched in my hand. The storm had cleared, the sky a bright, cloudless blue, but I couldn't shake the cold that had settled over me. I still drive that road sometimes, but never at night, never during a storm. And every time I pass the spot where I crashed, I think about the man in white, about what he might be looking for, and I pray that I never find out. If these stories sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to hit the like button and share the fear with your friend. Subscribe for more bone-chilling tales, and make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Have a horror story of your own? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Stay safe, and remember, the scariest things often happen when you least expect them. See you in the next night.